It's a typical Monday evening. You're spending your time endlessly doom scrolling on your phone, slowly draining whatever dopamine you may have left. In between your regularly scheduled content of funny cat videos and heinous threatening accidents, you're faced with this individual, a conventionally attractive female wearing typical punk clothing and demonstrating how she sleeps with her oversized Liberty spikes. If you actually have the ability to form a coherent thought after the hour of endless Chinese factory accidents you've subjected yourself to, you may start to ponder the hypocrisy of what you've just witnessed. An individual portraying the visual aspects of punk whilst seemingly going against all of its core values. These core values, of course, being anti-establishment, outward political messaging, and a DIY ethos. This so-called punk influencer is instead presenting self-obsession, narcissism, consumerism, and an extreme desire to receive as much attention through online numbers as possible. Although there are countless of these punk rock influencers crawling around on the internet, perhaps the most well-known is Erin McLaren, who has been accused by many of watering down the punk ethos. Erin McLaren has been lurking on the internet for quite a few years now, and for the most part has only received outwardly negative attention for her persona and attitudes towards the punk scene. She is primarily known for interviewing some of the most iconic names in punk, such as Doyle and Steve Ignorant, alongside allegedly begging for backstage passes at whatever show she wishes to attend, and subsequently getting banned from various punk-related events within the Los Angeles scene. One of her biggest controversies that doesn't involve her getting beat up is her removal and subsequent banning from the iconic Los Angeles festival Punk Rock Bowling. According to McLaren, she was banned due to her previous romantic involvement with organizer Sean Stern, although this claim makes zero sense as she was able to attend multiple years of the festival after the relationship had ended and prior to her eventually being banned, suggesting the cause may have been something else. It seems far more likely that she was banned for her alleged poor behavior surrounding the festival. You see, McLaren for some strange reason seems to have an ego problem, believing herself to be the greatest journalist within punk rock. This in turn led her to allegedly sneak backstage after being denied press accreditation and attempting to film without permission, resulting in her removal and outright banning from Punk Rock Bowling. She would later claim on a YouTube video that she didn't want to go to the festival regardless, despite attending almost every year beforehand. This sentiment seems to raise an important question. Does Erin McLaren actually enjoy the genre of punk rock, or does she just spike her hair in hazardous ways to attempt to grift off a style and genre that is eye-catching and appealing to many people online? That's a difficult question to definitively answer without actually attempting to speak to this leather-laden troglodyte. Although to be fair, I doubt you'd get a coherent answer. She looks like she's powered entirely by liquid death and Xanax. According to multiple interviews, she first became interested in punk music after befriending a punk at school and quickly became obsessed with the scene. This can seemingly be backed up by old videos of her actually supposedly enjoying the music at shows, although whether she would exhibit that same behavior if the cameras were off is unknown. She'd probably just look at you like this instead. What we do know is Erin McLaren's extensive history in modeling, which predated her interest in punk rock. According to an interview, she attended a modeling school at the age of 12, before pursuing a full-time career in acting and modeling at the age of 18. She immediately made it to the big screen as an actor, starring in cinematic masterpieces such as Poor Man's Bikini Beach as Bikini Girl and The Ugly Truth as Trashy Redhead. I wonder what attributes made her suitable for these roles. Obviously, acting wasn't working for her, so she instead decided to put as much gel in her hair as humanly possible and somehow wear even less clothing than she did in a Poor Man's Bikini Beach. You can probably already smell the grift coming off this punk rock cryptid. So what is it? Well, if you have a punk band that has a reputation that's far too positive in the community, you can allegedly pay Erin McLaren to wear your band shirt and immediately plummet that reputation. She also allegedly offers a similar service for clothing shops, charging a fee to be seen shopping at that store. It seems Erin believes herself to be a sort of Kanye West figure, where she can boost the reputation and allure of whatever she may be wearing. Only Erin McLaren hasn't said nearly enough anti-Semitic remarks and done enough nitrous oxide for that to be effective. At the very least, Erin McLaren's reputation and online following has allowed her to interview some extremely iconic names within punk rock. Surely she has contributed somewhat to the flow of punk rock information through her thoughtful and well-researched interview questions.
Started as one of the pioneers of oi punk. What was it like being a band in England in the 1970s in a genre that wasn't even fully defined yet at the time?
Well, I'd like to tell you first, before we begin, I'm not in a oi band, I'm in a punk band.
So, but with the history of Oi, they do say that it was like it kind of started and it was.
Even if you see her interviews as beneficial to the punk scene, they unfortunately have rapidly decreased in frequency after Erin Micklau supposedly realised the main reason people actually follow her. As of recent, all of her social medias consist of a sea of thirst traps, bikini pictures and lewd images, so much so that you need to swim through a sludge of smut to be able to see anything remotely punk rock related. I wonder how this change in content style coincides with the sudden popularity of a platform that rewards this kind of content. Erin Micklau is obviously an extremely contentious figure within a scene full of people that will already bash each other in the head just for fun, resulting in countless rumours surrounding Erin floating around the internet, ranging from Erin Micklau lacking any form of connection within the punk scene and essentially just faking her entire persona, to having a rich father that allegedly funds much of her life alongside her Hollywood home. What we do know for sure is the fact that much of Erin Micklau's allure, apart from posting thirst traps on a platform accessible by 13-year-olds, is the way in which she dresses and presents herself. This can be seen by many as the watering down of the subculture, once again taking something alluring from the past and sensationalizing it to the point where it stands out amongst the overcrowded nature of the internet. Erin Micklau and other punk rock influencers buy an expensive leather jacket only to cut them up with scissors and cover them with sponsored patches for more internet brownie points may seem completely antithetical to what punk rock is all about. Punk should be anti-establishment and against the idea of commercializing the punk scene and fashion for money, right? Surely this is just a new phenomenon only present in punk rock thanks to grifting influencers and the highly competitive nature of the internet. In order to find out the truth, we need to go back to the late 70s, to what I see as the moment in which typical punk style became a mainstay in fashion, a time where punk would rapidly spread across the globe seemingly overnight. Not long after punk first saw its roots in the United States with bands like Iggy and the Stooges and the Ramones, the sound quickly made its way to the United Kingdom, with artists such as The Clash and The Damned spreading the punk rock ethos and sound throughout the working class. Out of all the punk rock bands coming out of the UK in this time frame, one stood out from the rest. Although it wasn't particularly for their unique sound or message, it was more so the way they dressed, how they presented themselves, and the countless controversies they managed to wriggle themselves into throughout their short tenure. This band is obviously the Sex Pistols, who have become one of the most popular, although controversial bands in the history of punk rock, receiving worship from countless people across the globe. So why did the image of the Pistols become so appealing and iconic? Well, in order to understand that, we need to first briefly look into the fashion designer Vivienne Westwood and Sex Pistols manager Malcolm McLaren. Primary school teacher Vivienne Westwood and art student Malcolm McLaren would meet in London and quickly formed a common interest in fashion. McLaren would notice Westwood's innate ability to create dresses and encouraged the hobby, leading to Westwood creating many of McLaren's designs whilst continuing to work as a primary school teacher. In 1971, McLaren opened a shop in London named Let It Rock, which focused on selling primarily rock and roll memorabilia from the 50s, alongside clothing designed and crafted by Vivienne Westwood. The shop would go through various name and style changes, selling everything from teddy boy to rocker fashion, although its most iconic incarnation would come as a result of a brief stint McLaren had in America. Before spending time in America, McLaren had been following around the glam rock band New York Dolls for a number of months, starting off in Paris and eventually traveling to New York because I'd assume the smell was too unbearable. McLaren would eventually convince the band to hire him as a sort of unofficial manager and costume designer. I say unofficial because McLaren likely made from the venture, as New York Dolls at the time were too continuously wrecked to actually book any real gigs. When they were actually able to perform a show, McLaren decided to dress them up in stupid red leather suits to perform in front of a huge communist flag. I'd assume to rebel against American patriotism, which wouldn't be the first time McLaren would actively try to piss off the crowds of Americans, which to be fair is a very enjoyable pastime. McLaren's involvement with the New York Dolls, alongside endless consumption of this and this, led to the band imploding, with McLaren deciding to move back to the United Kingdom in order to continue his focus and efforts upon his fashion store. Although his stint in the United States was a complete failure in the conventional sense, he had become inspired by the burgeoning music scenes within the country, taking particular inspiration from the aesthetic and confrontational attitudes of figures such as Patti Smith and Richard Hell. This resulted in him rebranding his store to Sex, inspired obviously by Young Thug. The rebranding resulted in an entirely new image and, most importantly, new stock. The clothing would focus on what they called anti-design, essentially just offensive t-shirts and bondage wear designed for young people who intended to rock the status quo and piss off the older generation. Through this rebranding, McLaren was able to take into account the cultural shift away from the hippie style of the late 60s. The youth no longer wanted tie-dye, self-love and kidney infections. They wanted the complete opposite. They wanted to be confrontational and what's the opposite of pissing off old people by wearing cool and walking around barefoot? Well, apparently pissing off old people by wearing offensive t-shirts and bondage gear out in public, and in some cases wearing cool. The rebrand obviously attracted a more, let's say, unique client base, which continued to inspire McLaren. He began to fantasize about a rock band that focused on anarchy alongside an anti-establishment image and personality being brought to the forefront of the music industry. He wanted to create and manage whatever the he thought that was going to be. This is where the Sex Pistols get involved, who at the time were known as the Strand, which consisted of a completely different lineup to the eventual Pistols. You see, guitarist and eventual Pistols member Steve Jones was a big fan of theft, and actually formed the band after stealing a collection of instruments from a David Bowie tour. This fascination with stealing actually led him to Malcolm McLaren, as the sex store was one of his frequent theft locations. Somehow, regardless of the routine theft, the two formed a loose friendship, and after Jones found out that McLaren had managed the New York Dolls in the past, begged him to be their manager. Although McLaren agreed, he didn't seem particularly interested in managing the Strand to promote good music to the public. He saw it as a way to directly promote the style of fashion he was selling at Sex, and quickly reshuffled the lineup to correlate with this vision. This left the band without a singer. Luckily, Sex had the most heinous client base in the entirety of London, meaning it wouldn't be long until the perfect punk rock scoundrel walked through that door. This came in the form of a rancid ginger teenager with rotten teeth. As soon as McLaren laid eyes on this sorry excuse for a sentient being, he decided he was perfect to be the frontman, regardless of what his singing ability may be. He slapped the label of Johnny Rotten on the kid, gave him a microphone and called it a day. It would also be around this time that McLaren conveniently changed the band's name to coincide with the rebranding of his clothing store, and the Sex Pistols were born. McLaren immediately began supplying the Pistols with clothing from Sex to wear at shows and public appearances, which is quite ironic because I doubt a band consisting of a guitarist that steals for fun and a lead singer with rotten teeth would typically purchase overpriced bondage gear. But hey, this video is supposed to make a link between early punk and Aaron Miclau, so I hope you're beginning to see the connection. The band's shocking visual style, alongside the subsequent rise of contemporary punk rock bands in the country, resulted in a huge amount of success and label attention from EMI. They quickly became one of the most talked about acts in the United Kingdom, with more and more people buying and wearing the style of dress they were making popular. McLaren's furious focus on the image of the band led to bassist Glenn Matlock leaving. Matlock was clearly the most musically talented of the group, although unfortunately is responsible for this little stain on the state of modern metal. Although Matlock was musically talented, he didn't fit the image McLaren was trying to manufacture for the Sex Pistols. He was apparently too nice, too clean cut, and actually brushed his teeth regularly, which is apparently a no-no if you want to succeed in late 70s UK punk rock. According to Matlock, he left the band by his own volition, and according to McLaren, he was fired due to disagreements with Johnny Rotten. You guys probably already know the story at this point. Johnny Rotten had a crack-addled best friend named Simon Ritchie, who would also hang around the area that housed Sex. In terms of the punk rock image McLaren was trying to create for the band, Ritchie was perfect. His childhood that involved consistent abandonment alongside a mother that couldn't stop ingesting poppy seeds resulted in a certain look and attitude, which wasn't helped by the fact he lived in squats full time at that point. McLaren saw him as the perfect frontman, although instead used him as a replacement bassist for Matlock. There was only one problem: he didn't actually know how to play bass, which is usually a pretty important skill to know if you're to become a bassist in a band. This may initially seem confusing, but it makes perfect sense when analysing what McLaren saw as the Sex Pistols' biggest asset, their image. Sid continuously played into this image. He already had the look and backed it up by doing the most shocking on stage, all whilst wearing clothes sold at Sex, and making headlines across the nation. This was extremely important, as I doubt the music would have been able to be as successful without all the antics. Anyone aware of the Sex Pistols and their discography will quickly realise that they basically released cool, with it being pretty difficult to dig through their albums and find anything of real quality. So how did they become so iconic and so consistently labelled as the inventors of punk by people who don't know what they're talking about? Well, it's essentially because McLaren constantly orchestrated stunts with the goal of making them infamous within the UK and eventually across the globe. Swearing on live television? Yeah, McLaren purposely got the entire band wasted before the interview. Disastrous United States tour? Yeah, McLaren purposely booked them in extremely conservative locations, which went exactly how you'd expect when this man is faced with this man. Everything was done for the image and public persona, with the main goal being making money, directing traffic to sex, and fueling McLaren's ever-growing ego. The band broke up shortly after their explosion into the mainstream for various reasons, including McLaren and Sid both being silly billies in very different ways, resulting in very different consequences. McLaren completely distanced himself from punk entirely and moved on to his next swindle, forming the band Bow Wow Wow. Yes, the band famous for the song I Love Candy, which would be known by many as the PDFophile anthem. Although McLaren didn't invent punk, he can 100% be partially credited for the genre and subculture becoming so widespread across the globe. McLaren's successful promotion of fashion and image with the Pistols is why Aaron Miclau and similar punk rock influencers dress and act the way they do. Before McLaren, punk rock consisted of small secular scenes. Once McLaren took it and morphed it into something so easily recognizable, therefore easily marketable, just so he could sell more shitty bondage gear at sex, it became a global phenomenon. Of course, the visual style McLaren gave to the punk scene wasn't original at all, just a mismatch of things he had seen in the past, which became something appealing enough to attract countless vain, image-obsessed individuals to the subculture. Obviously, punk has gone through many evolutions throughout the years, with the vast majority focusing on activism and subject matter as opposed to dressing like a twat and throwing out as many swear words on live TV as possible. This deep dive into the history of McLaren may have been incredibly boring to those of you expecting a video of me insulting Aaron Miclau, Youngblood, and other punk influencers for upwards of 20 minutes, although I believe it's a vital story that directly relates to the state of much of punk's grifters in the modern day. The idea of utilizing a certain visual style to gain more attention and therefore money isn't something that's only present in the modern day. It's always been a thing, even at the beginning of these subcultures that we continue to look at through rose-tinted glasses, despite not even being alive during their birth. It's just a fact that the visual aesthetic is more appealing to the vast majority of people than actual substance, messaging, meaning, or even music. The modern day just makes it even worse due to the fast, dopamine-shredding nature of social media. Even in the 70s, the general public were more fascinated by a group of degenerates dressed in spandex on the cover of a magazine than the individuals actually pushing forward punk-related music. It's clear Aaron Miclau is just a modern version of this, although instead of saying f*** on live TV to sell more bondage gear, she's getting naked on the internet to fund a lifestyle that she probably wouldn't be able to acquire by actually putting in a day's work. The issue with Miclau more so arises when viewing the current state of punk culture. Its flurry within the mainstream outside of a few is well and truly over, leaving punk as primarily a self-sustaining DIY scene. It's these DIY scenes that Aaron Miclau is attempting to be a part of. Although utilizing a style of dress that more so looks like a parody of punk than anything else the grift online is irritating, I truly believe she may have been accepted into the scene whilst continuing the grift if it wasn't for her alleged bad behaviour and alleged tendency to be incredibly rude and condescending to any individual within the scene that's supposed to be equal. I mean, she's an attractive young woman, and nobody loves an attractive young woman more than an old, broke, crusty, lifelong punk. It's clear this whole thing is just inevitable. The punk style of dress is incredibly appealing and recognisable because it was originally designed to be eye-catching enough to inspire somebody to spend 3 figures for prostitute garms. It's a style that's so immediately eye-catching and synonymous with the idea of punk that it's bound to gain attention, positively reinforcing these punk rock influences to continue. In my eyes, the great tragedy of this entire thing, alongside any other subculture influencer, is the fact that many of these people utilize a style that's incredibly appealing to young people online, and therefore allegedly take advantage in incredibly strange ways. I swear we're just a decade away from being able to inject dopamine directly into our brains. Maybe they'll make a punk rock dopamine nicotine caffeine injection with Aaron Miclau posting thirst trap Instagrams promoting it, f it, just bring it on at this point. If it can happen, it will happen. We might as well just get it over with.